Chairman of the Banking Committee spoke before this vote and made the point that he wants to have a vote on all three Fed noms. I want to have a vote on all of the three Fed noms that have been under consideration in the exchanges today. Republicans want to vote on all three. We just voted on one. One of the three, our Democratic colleagues, had filed cloture on. The cloture ripened, it came due, we had the vote.
This one I keep.
So the obvious thing to do here is to set up votes on the other two. The other two are Chairman Powell, who is currently the chairman. He's been nominated by President Biden to another term as chairman, and Philip Jefferson, who has also been nominated by President Biden. I think he'd be the second African-American man in maybe the history of the Fed. I'm not positive of that, but I think so. And both of these two, it makes a lot of sense to go to them because there's overwhelming support for them. In fact, in the committee, Chairman Powell, I think, was reported out successfully on a vote in which I think there was only one vote in opposition to Chairman Powell. Overwhelmingly supported in the committee, and I think very likely overwhelmingly would be supported on the floor. Mr. Jefferson was unanimously reported out of the committee. In other words, every single Republican and Democrat on the Banking Committee supported Philip Jefferson, and I'm pretty sure still does, as I do. So my point is, I think we ought to go ahead and set up the vote. We don't have to have the vote right this minute, but we should set it up. We should do it soon. And so I have a unanimous consent request, which is identical to the unanimous consent request that was just proposed by our chairman, but for the reference to Lisa Cook. Since we just had that vote, obviously it doesn't make sense to include her in the unanimous consent request. So, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that at a time to be determined by the majority leader, following consultation with the Republican leader, prior to April 29, 2022, the Senate proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations. Calendar number 807, Jerome Powell, and calendar number 809, Philip Jefferson, that there be 60 minutes for debate equally divided in the usual form on each nomination, that upon the use or yielding back of time, the Senate proceed to vote without intervening action or debate on the nominations in the order listed. The motions to reconsider be considered made, laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, that no further motions be in order, that any related statements be printed in the record, that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate then resume legislative session.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Senator from Ohio.
reserving the right to object.
Senator is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's, I was going to say disappointing, but I guess appalling would be the better word. But not at all surprising, because I've watched my colleagues do everything they can to slow and delay, even boycotting actual votes in bloc. I've watched what they've done to these nominees and watched them continue to play politics with our economy. They've been AWOL in the fight against inflation for months. They talk about it a whole lot, but they don't really have solutions. They haven't abandoned their tax cuts for the corporations that are raising people's prices. As the presiding officer knows and has spoken passionately about, companies are making more and more and more money all the time, the biggest profits in American history. These companies continue to raise prices because they can. But my colleagues, when they've had opportunities to get talented, qualified women on the job to fight inflation at the Fed, they blocked them. Today, about an hour and a half, 2 hours ago, we offered to vote right now to get Chair Powell and Dr. Philip Jefferson on the Fed board immediately. And part of that motion was delay the vote on Dr. Lisa Cook until all our members are here and healthy. My colleague on the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee understands that a number of Senate Democrats were sick today and couldn't come and vote. So we just said in our motion, yeah, let's go ahead and vote on Chair Powell. I'm going to vote for him. Let's go ahead and vote on Dr. Jefferson. I'm going to vote for him too, and virtually all of my colleagues are. But let's just hold off on Dr. Cook because it's a close vote. Every single Republican's voting against a very qualified first African-American woman on the Federal Reserve in its 109-year-old history. But Senator Toomey objected to those two votes and with the request to just delay Dr. Cook for a time until members can come back. He'd rather play politics. He'd continue to denigrate this distinguished nominee, again, the first black woman ever nominated to the Fed. For some reason, the members of my committee, the Republican members of my committee, take great joy in trying to embarrass this nominee by saying she's not qualified. Not qualified, Spelman College. Not qualified, a Marshall Scholar. Not qualified, a Truman Scholar. Not qualified, studied in Oxford. Not qualified, PhD from Berkeley. All some of the greatest schools in the country. Not qualified, an economist at Michigan State University, one of the great state institutions in my part of the country. That's not qualified? Dr. Cook's a leading economist with years of research, international experience on monetary policy, on banking and financial crises. She's seen how economic policy, maybe this is what my colleagues don't like. She's seen how economic policy affects all kinds of different people in different parts of the country, from the rural South where she grew up to the industrial Midwest where she built a career. Two parts of the country that have been particularly affected in a negative way from globalization. Again, Spelman College alumna, Marshall Scholar, Truman College Scholar, studied at Oxford, PhD from Berkeley, tenured professor from economics and international relations at the state just north of me in East Lansing, Michigan, Michigan State University. Yet despite this extensive experience and her broad support, a small but excruciatingly loud, if I could use that adverb, a small but excruciatingly loud minority, far outside the mainstream, have engaged in a smear campaign against Dr. Cook. The same sorts of attacks that black Americans and women have faced for far too long. I won't recite the litany of votes in my committee against very qualified women and very qualified African American women. Senate Republicans buy into these attacks and in some cases are making these attacks. These naysayers absurdly claim that Lisa Cook doesn't meet the standards for this position, standards that seem to apply only to certain nominees who happen to be women, particularly black women. It's sort of a game of whack-a-mole. Each time these assertions and these allegations are rebutted, Mr. President, a new, more untethered one seems to arise. Dr. Cook would be, and I would assert, I don't just assert, I am certain, she will be the first black woman on the Federal Reserve in its more than 100-year history. Think about that. This is a country that's my state, the ranking member state are 10 to 15% African American. This country is about 12 or 13% black. The Federal Reserve is made up of 7 people. 1913 it was founded. 109 years, never been a black woman. We have a chance to put an outstanding, very qualified black woman on, and for some reason, they say, no, we're going to confirm her. Once our members are healthy, the couple of members that missed it, I believe it's 2, because of COVID, they're going to come back. We're going to confirm her, but for some reason, the ranking member of the committee would like to just embarrass Dr. Cook a little bit more. First, they make all these unwarranted attacks. Then they block her in committee. Then they called a boycott to stop any committee action on another very qualified woman, and I might add, parenthetically, because the oil industry didn't like her. So one of the things I particularly like about Dr. Cook, she understands, and maybe this is the objection, they want a Federal Reserve that's more sort of corporate dominated, corporate oriented, instead of putting workers at the center of our economy. I know Senator Merkley has been one of the leaders here, always understanding that workers should be the center of this economy. That's what Dr. Cook will do in the Federal Reserve. She understands small town South. She understands industrial Midwest. She's worked on the West Coast. She's worked all over this country. She's international in the way she looks at things, but fundamentally, she comes down to ordinary middle-class people and those who aspire to the middle class. She's ready to get to work to protect Americans from rising prices. We need her. We need all of President Biden's nominees on the job right now. But again, Senate Republicans could have earlier said, yes, he didn't have to object. Yes, we'll go forward with Powell. We'll go forward with Jefferson. But we want to embarrass Dr. Cook first. We want to show that we have the political muscle to defeat a really, really, really accomplished black woman first. That's what they've decided, that scoring political points is more important than serving the public and bringing down prices. So today, Mr. President, once again, a qualified black woman is going to have to wait. A qualified black woman is going to have to wait and wait and wait. We're going to confirm her, but she's going to have to wait a little bit longer until the 2 members of the Senate who are sick can return. The American people are going to have to wait. All because Senate Republicans have decided their political gamesmanship is more important than the constituents they're supposed to serve. One last time, say, make no mistake, we will confirm all of these Federal Reserve nominees. We could do it a lot faster if my colleagues wanted to cooperate. Mr. President, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
Senator from Pennsylvania.
I have to say it is sad and shameful to hear the chairman suggest, which he has done repeatedly now, including on the Senate floor, that there's some kind of racial bias against black women that is a motivation for Republicans. I would like to point out for the record fact that on the Senate Banking Committee, every single Republican senator has voted in favor of confirming 5 different black women to different posts in just this Congress. President Biden's nominees, who are black women, and they include Cecilia Rouse, Nuria Fernandez, Adrienne Todman, Alexis Latouche, and Alana McCargo. And yet we hear this preposterous notion that somehow the race of the candidate is what's going on here. Fact is, we have a difference of opinion about what qualifies a person to serve on the Fed. And it's not some tiny, obscure minority that is concerned about Lisa Cook's qualifications to be fighting inflation when she refused to articulate any plan for dealing with inflation. It was a majority of the Senate that just voted. We just had the vote. And I should also point out that what's the difference here? The difference is we want to vote, and you just heard the chairman block a vote on President Biden's nominee to chair the Fed, Jerome Powell, and Professor Philip Jefferson. The chairman doesn't want votes on either of them, apparently. Certainly not on both of them. He just objected. I would remind everyone that for months now, we have been trying to process the Fed nominees, and our Democratic colleagues refused. What we said was there are 5 nominees. Only one of them is we're going to object to processing. And the reason was because of her radical views about using the supervisory powers of the Fed to allocate capital throughout the economy. That was a pretty radical idea. And guess what? The majority of the Senate agreed with us. And so she withdrew her candidacy. We had offered for months now to process the other 4. Earlier today, we were willing to do all 3. But I think the record should show our Democratic colleagues refused to allow us to have a vote today or tomorrow or this week. That's what we asked for. We used the exact same language the chairman had used earlier on the chairman of the Federal Reserve and Professor Philip Jefferson. I yield the floor.
Senator from Ohio.
Yeah, just to be clear, Mr. President, we did offer that just an hour, maybe now 2 hours ago, after the ranking member and I have spoken for maybe 20 minutes, more or less. Just to be clear, we offered in that unanimous consent request that we vote on both Chair Powell and Dr. Jefferson, and simply delay the vote on Dr. Cook because several members that wanted to vote for her were not here. Instead, the ranking member decided he wanted to just one more time try to embarrass Dr. Cook. It's not really going to work because we're going to confirm her, but just to be clear, my motion only 2 hours ago was let's move forward on those 2. That was rejected by Senator Toomey. I yield the floor.
The clerk will report the nomination.